Welcome back to Wisconsin Wonder Garden. In today's video, we're going to be taking you throughout our entire watering and maintenance schedule on every one of our plants. Alright, let's get this show on the road. We're going to start with this top shelf here, which has a pothos, a ZZ plant, a type of barrel cactus, unknown variety, a Hoya, a large jade plant, and then lastly we have a Begonia Rex. You're in the video? Yeah. Good job. This pothos we have growing into a living wall. These are pretty easy to tell when they need water, as the leaves will start to droop down like all of these ones are. They just really kind of look a little bit frail and are actually literally more flimsy than they normally are. This has gone beyond the point that it should have with watering, just like all of these plants are extra stressed right now because I've been so busy over the holiday season. But this planter has drainage holes in the bottom with a water reservoir. For this whole thing, I'm going to do about 3 cups of water for this container here, and I water this once every 3 weeks. With some other regular maintenance needed, such as trimming off any dead leaves that you see. If you do this every time you water, you're going to help prevent disease in the plant, and also it looks better. You don't want a bunch of dead leaves hanging there.
May I help you? May I help you? Oh, no, too much!
Next up, we've got our ZZ plant. I'll pull that down and show you what I do with this one. With this ZZ plant, I like to clean off the leaves every other time when I water it, especially some of these older ones. These new ones are fairly new growth, and I don't have to clean those yet. Even these ones are just fine. But some of these original leaves are quite dirty and full of dust. So in order to help the process of photosynthesis, it can be required to clean off and dust the leaves periodically. You're just going to take a paper towel and moisten it, and then just support the leaf and petal with one hand, and then you'll just support the petal with one hand and swipe it with the other to get all that dust off of there. This process will help remove any mold or mildew that might be on your plants as well. I've found a couple of people have come across that with their ZZ plants or other indoor plants. This can help protect against that, as it just kind of helps the buildup of dirt and grime that slowly and eventually encourages mold growth on the plant itself. Right here you can see we have a dead portion of the plant from when we propagated this in a previous video. At this point, I'm just going to take that and chop that piece off. I really do always try and make sure that I remove any dead plant matter in order to make sure that we don't encourage any growth of disease or funguses on and around the plant. The container here has a mix of about 25% coconut coir, and then the rest is a peat moss and soil mixture. I think it's about 50-50. We might have a video on repotting this. I don't remember if I did a video or not, but it's a pretty well draining mixture. These ZZ plants don't require a lot of water. This container does have a water basin down in the bottom. I like to water this very slowly up until the point where I see water coming out of the bottom here. I do find with the coconut coir that it doesn't soak up the water very well, so I end up putting a second plate under this to make sure it doesn't leak out onto my shelf. This container is going to take about 2.5 cups of water every 3 weeks. Okay, there we go. The ZZ plant is ready to go until our next watering. Here we have a barrel cactus variety, at least I think it is, that has a couple of little babies shooting out from it that will be propagated soon here. This thing really doesn't require any maintenance at all, except for cutting off the pups. If you would like to, you can just leave them there as well. And then I water this like once every month to a month and a half. Depending on the time of the year too, I'll water it a little bit more in the summer months, but not a lot during the winter months. This whole container here, just to give you an idea on the size, I'm going to give this container a measly 2 cups of water. And there's no signs of any disease, no bugs, no mold or fungus in the soil either. So all we've got to do is give it the water. And voila, the cacti. Very easy. With that cactus plant that is in a draining container, and I just put a plate under it there because it's got a hole right beneath it. And then that's in a standard store-bought cactus soil mixture. We've recently acquired this plant from my mother-in-law, so it is in need of a lot of soil there in this container, and it needs to be reseeded in the soil as well. That way a lot of this growth that's way down in it can get the sunlight that it needs, and then we can also get the amount of soil that's needed for this plant, but that will be in a later video. In this plant's current state, we're going to give it about 1.5 cups of water. A lot of it is going to drain out of the bottom here. Oh, quite a bit actually. We're just going to dump that back. There. I'm actually going to put a little bit more water there since this drained out so quickly, just to fill up this bottom basin. That way it can wick up through the soil as needed. So we'll be good on this one up until the point where we repot it. There is one leaf in here that is pretty yellow. This one here. And it does have a little bit of damage there, but I'm going to leave that on up until if this part here, this damage expands a little bit further, then I will think about cutting that off, but I think I'll leave it for now. Otherwise, the plant is in good condition. This thing's a beast. With this jade plant, I did a quick inspection for spider mites and stuff, and there's a couple of trouble areas. Like this right here, you can see a few clusters of them. I'm going to take those areas and spray them off with our rubbing alcohol. And I'm also going to trim up any dead spots like this one. I'm going to take back all the way to the main stem where it grows from. I'm going to cut that all the way back. That one just did not do well after our pruning. So we'll give those few areas a nice spray down. Spray it from every angle and make sure you spray it down with water 5 minutes after you apply the rubbing alcohol. This, I believe, is a 1.5 gallon pot filled with a mixture of peat moss, regular soil, and then perlite. I think it's about 1/3 of each of those. And this is going to take 3 cups of water. Right there. And that's it. Here we have a Rex Begonia that I've been growing indoors for this summer. And it's been doing really well up until this point where I haven't watered it for about 4 weeks. That's definitely too long for this plant. As you can see, it's getting really stressed out from that. I think it will definitely recover just fine, but I typically like to do a watering on this once every 2 weeks. It is a sealed container, about this large, maybe 1/2 gallon. So every 2 weeks, I will only put about 1.5 cups of water in this. This Rex Begonia has actually grown way bigger than it was when I first got it. It was maybe It had like leaves about this size and a set of maybe 4 of them. So it's definitely been doing just fine growing indoors up until this point where I haven't watered it in such a long time. But I have no doubt that it'll bounce back just fine. It's also the winter months, so it's going to see some of those annual changes too. So there we go. About a cup and a half of water. And I'm also going to cut this one leaf off here, as I think it is beyond repair. And that's also going to help encourage some new growth too. If you do see some leaves that look like they're either dead or dying, don't worry about cutting them off, because that's really going to help the plant out in the long run, because it's going to put the growth towards the leaves that will produce the most growth in the plant. Really an interesting plant. A lot of people don't grow them indoors, but I think it adds a cool look to the indoor garden here. I forgot to mention that Rex Begonia is in just plain potting soil. On to our next shelf, we have a succulent planter, an Anthurium, a Hoya, a bird's nest fern, and a rattlesnake calathea. Here in this succulent container, I have noticed a lot of spider mites because I have neglected it for about a month, if not a little bit more. You can see all of that right there. That is going to get cut off. And then this one right here, that's going to get cut off. And then I'm also going to top off this Crassula variety. And then I will give the plants, the ones that do have spider mites, a nice spray of this 50-50 rubbing alcohol and water mixture. So let's get to topping off these plants that are beyond repair. Some of these larger patches can also be just smushed with your hands as a extra layer of protection against them, even beyond the rubbing alcohol. I would do both anyways, or neem oil if you're using that. Now we're going to give them a nice spray from all directions and angles on the plants that did have mites on them, which just happen to be pretty bad in this container here. Next, we're going to take this Graptosedum paraguayse and cut it off right here. As you can see, it was pretty etulated, so we're going to cut it off at the stem where it's going to produce new offshoots, and then we're just going to bury this in the soil. As you can see, it has some roots developing, and will grow just fine by sticking it in just like that. This container is 2 feet by 6 inches and is going to take 4 cups of water. All right, there's 4 cups of water. And the soil mixture in this one is 50% peat moss and 50% regular potting soil. I found that to be a really good mixture for succulents, and I've had great success with it over the past few years. This cute little succulent planter is in a sealed container in a plain succulent mix with a little bit of added peat moss in there. We are going to give this thing about half a cup of water. It's a little bit dry right now, being that it's gone a little bit over a month without watering. But with that being said, it's really not the worst shape because it's in a sealed container. It really can go quite a long time without watering. I did a visual inspection on the plant, and there's no sign of any disease or pest problems, so we're just going to go ahead and water it. I'm just going to use my watering can for this one. Again, it is about half a cup of water in that container right there. And that's it for this succulent one. Next up is a beautiful Anthurium given to us by my mother-in-law. This thing is in regular potting soil and takes half a cup of water every week. I found that it does best with a smaller amount of water more frequently instead of a large amount of water more sparingly. So if you did like a once every 3 weeks watering, it's not going to be as happy as once a week. So that's why I do half a cup once a week in a container that is, I think it's a 4-inch container right here. So pretty small container at this point. Just about half a cup of water. And that's it. If you notice, it does have some browning tips on it. And that's due to just, it was a little bit neglected at my mother-in-law's house, and that's why she gave it to us. So eventually that is going to be all flushed out by new growth, and then I'll just clip these off as that new growth comes in. Overall, I love the Anthurium. They're a beautiful plant. It has some really nice dense foliage, and the flowers that these put off are beautiful. So that's it for the Anthurium. Half a cup of water once a week. Next up is another Hoya. This is in what I believe to be plain potting soil. This was given to us by our mother-in-law as well. It's in pretty good shape, except for the fact that it just needs to be repotted. As you can see, there's some exposed roots out of the soil there. So in an upcoming video, as I said earlier, we're going to be repotting both of these. This one is going to take about the same amount of water, just about like a cup of it. And that's it. Nothing else needed with this one. Next up is our bird's nest fern, which was looking a little rough, and now I know why. I haven't been paying attention to this like I normally do, and it's got some spider mites. So luckily this plant has very flat leaves. So being a fern, I'm just going to take my fingers and wipe off a lot of these mites so I don't have to spray it actually. And then from here on out, I'm going to be watching this a little bit closer just to make sure that those mites don't come back at all and aren't causing any issues with the plant. And this thing actually, in this case where we're at right now, I want to start flushing out some new growth over this this next winter going into spring. I want to get a lot of new growth this spring. So what I'm going to do is actually cut off like this whole bottom layer of leaves. I'm going to do a major cutting on this thing in order to encourage some new growth. It might seem a little bit extreme, but this plant is going to react just fine to it. I've done this in the past with good results. So I'll show you how I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to leave maybe the first 3 layers of leaves in here. So, and then cut off everything else below it. So I'll just lift up the leaves here and then start cutting off everything else. You can see like this one here is one that I've cut off in the past just to encourage some new growth, and that's what I've done a couple of times already. Clip, clip. You might see some gardeners gasping at this point at what I'm doing, but I've found that plants don't like to be left alone. If they're left alone, they definitely grow, but if you get them, give them a little bit of an extra kick sometimes, they react pretty well to it. So I really encourage you guys to experiment with your plants and the growth of them. Don't worry about being way too delicate with them and not touching them and not seeing how they react to different sort of things like this, because you're definitely, you'll be surprised with how well plants do with things like this. We cut off quite a few leaves here, and this is what we are left with. If we look down into the center, you can see that that's where the leaves grow from. They kind of twist out in typical fern-like fashion, and then we'll see some nice new growth. This plant will fill out within, I would say, by like June or July of this year. It'll look just like it did before, and all of these old leaves that we cut off will be replaced with new, healthy, vigorous growth. This container has a mixture of peat moss and regular potting soil. I think it is a little bit less than 50-50, so I would say maybe even 75% regular potting soil and then peat moss on that as well. So this can do well with a very well draining mixture. So even if you bumped up the peat moss to like 75% or 50%, they'll do just fine. This container is going to take about a cup and a half of water. And there, I'm done with the maintenance on this one. I typically only do these cuttings on this like twice a year for this fern. And that way I make sure that I clip off any growth that's just not going to be doing too well and encourage some nice strong growth on the inside. In fact, I'm going to cut this one off here because it was just a little bit damaged by those mites. So we're just going to chop it off while we can. I don't really need to delay that one. Might as well chop it off right away. So there we have our bird's nest fern. Here we have another one of my favorites in the indoor garden, which is this rattlesnake calathea. I've heard it pronounced so many different ways. I don't really care. This plant is one of my favorites because of the amount of movement we have in these leaves. As you can see, they're pretty shut at this point. Like this one right here is almost completely shut. But after I water this in a couple of days, these leaves open flat once again like they are normally. And then they will also lay out a little bit more than they are right now. When it gets dried up, they kind of contract like that. And then when they're in a good solid state, they'll relax a little bit. So it's a really cool plant in that it talks to you. It moves based on what it wants and needs. I'm going to give this one a nice dusting. As you can see, it probably, I don't know if you can see, but it's a little bit dusty. So we're going to clean off a majority of these leaves. Again, this is mostly to help the process of photosynthesis, because if there's just too much dust on there, the plant's not going to be doing too well, as it kind of blocks out some sunlight from getting to that leaf. And it also helps prevent disease on that leaf. Now looking down beneath inside the plant, we have a couple of dead leaves that we are going to snip off. Just a little bit of surgery here. Spinning it around, we've got a couple of more dead ones over on this side. We're just going to snip those right off. And that's it. Now we're going to water this. I believe this has a regular indoor plant soil mixture. And this is in a 6-inch container with a water basin at the bottom. Usually I'll give this about a cup of water, maybe a cup and a half. And sometimes you might have a problem if you haven't watered your plant a long time. The water will drain right down to the water basin and spill out. In that case, you might have to water it inside a sink or something like that, and then just soak the plant thoroughly and then tip out the water basin when you're done to get rid of some excess moisture. And that will take care of your plant during that watering cycle. Next up, it's hard to see because it's behind all of the plants in this windowsill, but I have a large growing container that has Sansevieria, Opuntia, and Cholla cactus, as well as some of these pencil cactus. And that is, I think, 2 feet wide by about a foot deep. And that is going to take about half a gallon of water in that whole container. And so I just take my watering container and pour it across that whole surface. I've never really had a problem with spider mites or anything like that on cacti or Sansevieria, so I'll just periodically check it to make sure that it doesn't have any issues and I'm not seeing any stress in the plant. If I do have stress in the plant and see that, then I'll pull that whole container out of there to inspect and see what it looks like. That is in a mixture of, I think it's 50% peat moss, 50% regular potting soil. And then I have a little bit of perlite and some wood chips, some tree bark actually mixed in there. Pretty typical mixture for me for that planter. So that's how I do this one back here. Next up, we have our pretty large aloe. This is in a 1.5 gallon sealed container. It does have a section down below where it's maybe 1.5 inches above the soil to hold the water. And this will take 3 cups of water every 3 weeks. You don't really have to worry about watering this too often. As you can see, it's one of my largest plants that I have. We recently transplanted that. We've got a whole care guide on that aloe too. The same story with this one. I usually never have to do any sort of maintenance besides watering. I don't have any issues with bugs at all. I do check periodically to make sure I don't get any tip burn on this plant from the sunlight or the lights. Typically it's a pretty low maintenance plant, so I'm gonna put 3 cups of water in that right now. Next up is our Monstera deliciosa. What I do with this one is water it every 2 weeks, so a little bit more frequent with this one. And this is in a 1 gallon container. So I really give this about 1.5 cups of water, maybe 2 cups of water every 2 weeks. Again, this one is in a sealed container with a water basin at the bottom, so that's why it doesn't take a whole lot of water. But these Monsteras do like a high humidity in your household, so if you're in a really dry climate, I would recommend putting a humidifier around it, or even if you would like to mist it every day, that is really going to help your Monstera out. As you can see, we've got some dead leaves down around the bottom. That's out of the lack of water over these last few weeks, because it's been like almost 4 weeks since I've watered this one. So I'm just going to trim those off of here and then give it water, and that's it. Next up is these group of mutts, these succulents here. I just kind of throw in my random cuttings and leaves into this grow bed here. It's about 1 foot by 6 inches, and then maybe 6 inches deep, almost 8 inches deep there. And I will just give this 4 cups of water every 3 weeks. That will be fine for this. I'm not going to do any trimming or cutting on these. I'm just gonna let them grow wild and see what they do. There's nothing too impressive on this one, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. I do want to show you guys this stuff right here that is growing on the outside of this. I'm not sure what it is, but it's only growing on the container itself. It must be some sort of a fungus. Even if I like wipe it off, it'll just kind of reappear over time. So I don't know, it doesn't seem to affect or grow onto any of the succulents at all, so I'm not too worried about it, but it's just kind of weird, whatever it is. So anyways, 4 cups of water going into this one. It may seem like quite a bit, but with this container being so deep, I found that the water just wicks up over time, and it really does well with these larger containers. And it's an easy way to grow a bunch of succulents in one spot, because you don't have to deal with watering every single one, and it kind of provides a cool look. When we move into the next room, we've got some more containers like this with some succulents that are much better looking than these ones. As I said, these are my mutt succulents, so just taking up some growing space at this point. These little babies are my Epiphyllum Guatemalense Monstros EP1. This is the mother plant that I took the fruit from, and then we're growing these little cute little babies, these seedlings. These right now, believe it or not, I think are 6 months old, maybe 5 months old. So they're really slow growing at first, but it's been a really cool process to take the fruit from this one and germinate the seeds and watch them grow. These I will definitely, I make sure I water these every week, without exception. I put about a half a cup in here because it does evaporate pretty quickly because it's a shallow container, and they need to be watered every week up until they're about 8 months old. At that point, you can separate them and then start watering a little bit less frequently over time. So I'll maybe move to a week and a half, and then 2 weeks after that point. In like a year and a half, we'll be at about a 2-week watering frequency with these. So really, really slow grower. It takes some patience, but they will definitely be really cool to grow and raise. And this is what the mother plant looks like. They also call them curly Sue epiphyllums. So really an interesting one here. Like I said, half cup with this one, and then this is going to get about a cup of water into this container. With this epiphyllum, if they start wrinkling up, that's a sign that it is underwatered. So you don't really have to worry about this thing dying. If you do underwater it, it's just going to wrinkle up, and at that point you'll be able to tell, oh hey, I should water it. But this could easily go like 5+ weeks without being watered, and it'll come right back after you do water it. Just a little bit in there, and a little bit more in that one. Again, that's a Guatemalense Monstrose EP1. That's an Epiphyllum Cacti. Here are the Sansevieria that we propagated really recently via rhizome. These are in a container with a hole at the bottom, and I give these about 2 cups of water during the watering. Right there. And that's it. Not a whole lot to be said about those. Again, like I said, I really never have any issues with pests and stuff on Sansevieria, and they're pretty hardy and low light requirement plant too. Here we have some Pelea peperomioids. This is going to get about half a cup of water. Oh, maybe a little bit more. That's okay. It's got a drainage hole in the bottom. These ones, I recently trimmed up all of the bottom leaves to encourage some new growth coming out of the top. This one just does not seem to be growing very well, and I don't know why. It might be just a very poor specimen, but it just seems to be a slow grower and hasn't put off any pups or anything like that down in the soil. But you know, at least we have one species of this one, because I think it's definitely an essential to have in your plant collection indoors. But unfortunately, this one's just not really thriving for whatever reason. I think come this next spring, I'm gonna keep it on a normal fertilization schedule to see if we can maybe encourage some better growth out of it. But at this point, well, we got what we got with that one. In this room, we're down to the last few plants. I'm going to show you the ZZ plants that we propagated. Our Christmas cactus, Alocasia African mask, our Amaryllis, which unfortunately I don't think is going to bloom. As you can see, it's just gigantic and not throwing out a flower at all. And then a Chihuahuanensis, Echeveria, and a zebra plant there, as well as our fiddle leaf fig that we had recently chopped the tops off of in order to propagate, but we were unsuccessful. So let's show you guys how we water the rest of these plants in here now. With these ZZ plants, they are in a variety of mixtures. Some are in plain soil, some are in peat moss and regular soil mixture. This is part of an ongoing propagation experiment that you can find on our channel. These are gonna get about half cup to 3/4 cup of water in each one. They do have a drainage hole down at the center So really, I'm just going to fill it about to the brim there on each one. Not quite that far with this one. There we go. And that's it for those. This Amaryllis is going to get half cup of water, maybe a little bit more, sometimes a cup. By the way, that wasn't a whole watering. I'll give that about a cup every week to week and a half. I have read that these like to be watered a little bit more frequently, just like the Anthurium does. So that's why I water this one once a week. Like I was saying about the flower, I don't think it's going to flower this year for whatever reason. I just bought it at the store this year, so I haven't grown this over this last summer. But I bought it at the store, and I guess it just didn't have enough energy stored up or something to shoot a flower out. So after this winter, we're going to grow this thing outdoors and show you guys how to store it and put it into a dormancy stage over winter. So that way, hopefully we can get some nice flowers off of it this next winter. But this winter, unfortunately, I think we're just going to get foliage, which is okay. I mean, it looks cool. It's huge. It's really big. But no bueno on the flower for that one. This is in a really coarse mixture. I actually used an orchid mix on this one. So that's another reason why I can water it once a week, is because it's really well draining. As you can see, it has a lot of really thick, like tree bark type material and organic matter like peat moss in there. So that's what the soil mixture is on that one. It also has a very small hole at the bottom of it at this point. Our Alocasia African mask is actually in need of some maintenance, as it's been a long time since I've watered it. So it's definitely gone through shock and needs some surgery. I'm going to chop off this leaf completely, throw that away. I'm going to leave this one. It is definitely on its way out, but it can maybe provide a little bit more energy in the plant than just one more. And so I expect to see a new shoot come up here shortly. This one, I think, came up about a month and a half ago, maybe. This is about a month and a half old. We started with the one that I cut off, and then this one here. And that one came up, so we should see another one coming up shortly. And then they just kind of go in rotation. As one of the leaves is about to die, just chop it off and let some new growth come in, and eventually the plant's going to get bigger and bigger. This is in a well-draining mixture, but I found that it does like to be a little bit more moist than usual. I'm pretty new at growing this Alocasia African mask, so I can't tell you exactly how to care for it, but that's just what I've noticed so far. I will give this about a cup and a half of water during each watering, and again, it has a drainage hole and a water retention dish at the bottom of it. So cup and a half of water, here we come. That's it for that Alocasia. Our Christmas cactus, as you can see by the coloring, it's got a deep red hue. It's going through a dormancy stage and has already flowered and bloomed, and this is going to be the first water that I've given it in I think 5 weeks. So when your Christmas cactus is beginning to flower, and before it flowers, you want to dramatically reduce the watering schedule in order to induce that dormancy stage. So that's what I did with this one. This isn't a sealed container at this point, but it will soon be repotted into a draining container, as it will do so much better in there. But this was the original container that I propagated it in. This is going to get about 3/4 cup of water at this point, not a whole lot. I won't water this again for another month. I only increase the watering schedule once it's towards late winter, and then I will bring it to a once every 3 week watering schedule at that point. But right now, I'm not going to water it for another month. I love the Christmas cactus. It's a really cool plant, super popular too. You guys have been loving the Christmas cactus videos. So I hope your Christmas cacti and Easter cactus or Thanksgiving cactus are all doing really well too. Let me know if you have any questions or problems with that, and I can definitely help you all out. Here we have this zebra plant, and then the succulent right here that I got sent from Lula's garden. These are just going to take a tiny little bit of water because I believe they're in a sealed container in there. So just about that. That's all I'm going to give them. And then that's going to retain them for about 2 to 3 weeks. Again, succulents don't need a whole lot of water, especially in a sealed container like that. So you'll be able to tell with a zebra plant like this one, the tips of the leaves will start to curl over a little bit and dry up. And then with this one too, you'll be able to tell because the petals just start to shrivel up a little bit when they're really dry. But otherwise, I give these ones a tiny little bit of water. Let me shake off these water beads. So we had some beading up at the top, and the reason why I dumped that over is because if we get any direct rays of sun going onto that, then that can cause some damage on your succulents and other plants. So try and avoid that if at all possible. So those are those two, pretty simple. I checked and don't see any signs of pest or disease, so those are good to go. And lastly, in this room we have our fiddle leaf ficus, and these get really big, but at this point I just recently took some cuttings from them. I cut off the tops of each of these stems in order to propagate, which was a major failure. Nothing happened at all. I tried everything I could. You guys can go back and find those videos. They're actually kind of funny because of how big of a failure it was. At this point, I think I'm going to try and propagate them again, but from the brand new green growth that we have coming out of here, I think I might have success with that as compared to these older stems that we took the cuttings from to propagate. I think that might be our problem. Fingers crossed that is our problem. So I actually really love the way it looks now at this stage, being so small and compact. It's not just this giant thing taking up my entire growing area. So I think I'm gonna continually chop this off, as I'm really surprised by how fast it grows too. I don't really have to worry about the way it looks when it's just the stem, so it looks like I've just got some sticks hanging out here in my grow area. These leaves filled in like within a month. They started growing, and it's really impressive how fast these things grow. This is in a pretty big container. I think it's a 2-gallon pot, maybe a little bit more, and it's got a water basin down below. This is a mixture of peat moss and regular potting soil, as well as some perlite mixed in there. This is going to take about 4 to 5 cups of water. Right there. That's going to be it. Hopefully, with it being so dry, oh, there we go. Hopefully all that water doesn't drain out of the bottom real quick. Like I said earlier in this video, sometimes you might have that problem if your soil is super dry. It's just going to drop right down to the bottom and then fill up your water retention dish. But looks like we'll be good on this one. I'm going to give it a little bit more water. With it being such a large container, I don't really have any worries with this plant being overwatered, especially since it's like a semi-hardwood type plant. It's not like anything that needs to be really dry for the most part. These figs can be a little bit more wet. Okay, finally, that's everything in this room. Let's move on to the next room where we've got a bunch of large succulent planters. Moving on to the next room, in here we have primarily all succulents, and they're all in a mixed group container. So there's multiple plants all in one container. So these use a little bit more water and can also be watered less frequently as well. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to go through the plants and take a look and see if any of them need maintenance, as it has been quite a long time since I even took a look at them. Unfortunately, I'm sure some of them are going to have spider mites, because I've found that if you don't pay attention to your plants for a long period of time, even if you think you've gotten rid of spider mites in the past, they will show up. I guarantee it. They will show up. They find a way. Let's take a look at these plants and see what needs to be done. Sure enough, we pulled down this first one and you got a bunch of them right there. So in this case, we're going to do the same thing as we have been doing. We're just going to take it, and I'm actually going to chop off this first little bit just to get rid of a majority of them and encourage some new growth in the plant too. Chop that off. Chop this off. Then we've got one more bad section over here. So again, that's going to encourage some nice strong growth coming out of the top of the plant there. And then we're just going to mist it with that rubbing alcohol, followed by, in 5 minutes, a spray of water. So just a quick spray on those trouble areas of this whole planter. And then we will continue on with some trimming of these blue chalk sticks right here, as they're getting a little bit out of hand. We're just going to take these and cut them where I did last time. Way back. And that will allow the main stem to build up strength and grow nice and strong. And before you know it, we'll have new stems shooting off of here too. So that's why I usually encourage to trim up your succulents pretty often if possible. These calanchos look pretty nice. So does the little echeverias that we have planted. The ogre ears are a little bit rough just because I think they're dry. So we're just going to straighten a couple of things out in here and then give it a watering. This is a sealed container, and it's maybe about a foot wide by 4 inches deep. And we're going to give this about 2 cups of water. Right there is 2 cups of water. Since it's a sealed container, that water will stay in here and won't drain out the bottom, and there's not going to be as much evaporation in the soil itself. So that one is all done. Have nothing else to do there. The next one we have is this cool glass container that we planted some moss in that they're not taking too well, but we're trying to hold in there as long as we can to try and get them to grow. Maybe just squeeze out the last bit of life that they have. The first thing that we're going to do right here is a visual inspection. We don't have any problems with spider mites, any other gnats or anything either. So that's all good. Now there is some dead foliage here on these ogre ears. And then a couple pieces from the blue chalk sticks that we're just going to take off. And again, we're going to top this blue chalk stick right there. Take off some other dead stuff that I see. Right, here's one dead piece. Throw that all away. And then you can see right here, there's some dead stuff. These are getting real long. I don't think they're flowers. They don't look like flowers at all to me. Definitely not flowers. They're just shooting up growth. Probably reaching for the sun, as this is just an eastward facing window, so not the most ideal. But we're going to go ahead and chop both of those off. This side shoot here I don't really want. I'm going to cut that off. Cut this little shoot up. They're kind of like water sprouts in a tree. If you've ever grown fruit trees or any other tree for that matter, you kind of want to trim off the water sprouts in order to allow growth in the main stems and main portions of the plant. That's kind of what I'm doing here. Looking at the moss, this one's not too bad, but this variety that we got over here, that one's a little bit more rough. There's some greener pieces down below, so I'm hoping eventually it will take root. So fingers crossed on that one. And now it's time to water. For this container, we're going to do about the same amount, just about 2 cups for this one. This one is a little trickier though, because the edge of the bowl right here isn't very high off of the soil. And the soil up here is actually sloped downwards. So I end up having a lot of water run to the bottom. So I've got to do this one kind of slow. So I'm going to tip this backwards to get some of that water draining back in that side. And there is our second cup. Again, I'm just using this to give you guys a good idea of how much water I'm putting in there. I normally don't do this. I just go off of what I feel, but I'll be able to illustrate exactly how many cups I'm putting into each container this way. So that one is all done. This is the next container, which we have this watch chain succulent. I love this succulent because it's so weird, and the texture is actually really, really cool, and it grows like crazy. I would say it's definitely a fast grower. I would recommend picking that up for your collection if you don't already have it. Then over here, this bigger one, we had an Echeveria variety that went kaput, and I've been trying to revive it. It just has not worked. I'm not sure what the issue was, but I think that one, we're going to do one last final cut down on the bottom here and give this whole planter a really good watering to maybe see if we can inspire some growth out of that plant. First things first, I'm going to cut that off. As you can see, yeah, it's dead. I think we might be able to get some growth out of it though, after all. After a nice visual inspection, none of these plants have any problems with pests. So again, we're going to do 2 cups on this container. Right there is 2 cups worth. Now in this container, I'll turn it around so we have better view at the way plants are growing here. You can see a lot of these ones are etchelated and stretching out towards the light, and then we got one larger rosette at the end, like this one. In this case, we're just going to chop that off and then dump this rosette right into the soil where it will form a new plant. These ones I'm going to leave until they get a little bit more growth, and then I'm going to top them off because I've found that calanchos of this variety just do a little bit better when I do that. These sedum, the donkey tails, obviously we're going to leave those grow, as they should be etchelating and growing out long. And then these stacking cressulas we're going to leave. But then this Echeveria here, unless that might be a graptosedum, there is a couple of tiny little ones on there that I'm not going to worry about. I'm just going to cut this stem way back to this point and then throw this away and let some new rosettes form out of this head here. We're going to do the same thing on this blue chalk stick as we have been with our other ones. We're going to chop it off to encourage some new growth, and then it's going to branch off at that point, hopefully. This you could just stick into the soil after taking off these leaves here if you wanted to, but I've got enough blue chalk sticks. I'm not too worried about it. As you can see, this is a Graptosedum paraguaceae. They are a lot of fun to grow and really hardy too, so that's one of my favorite succulents to grow, Graptosedum paraguaceae. I also have a bunch of different Echeveria varieties that I don't really know the name of, and sedums too, but in particular this Graptosedum is one of a kind, a really cool grower too. This planter is a little bit larger, so we're going to put the rest of our water in there, plus a little bit more. So that's 2 cups. And then with our pitcher, I'm just going to put in about another cup's worth. This planter is doing quite well, and I've paid a little bit more attention to this one, especially when it comes to these ones on the end, which are Graptosedum paraguases, and then a couple of little Pearly von Nurnbergs, which are these purple ones. Those are also one of my favorite succulents to have in the house because they put off a really pretty purple hue. You can see these ones down here are growing fantastic. I'm not going to do anything with those at all. We've got a couple of Aeonium kiwis. That's one, there's one, and there's one right here that are growing quite well. They haven't gotten their color in yet because they're so small, but that will come with time. Those ones are doing quite well. So I'm going to turn this around so you guys can see what we're looking at. There's a lot of damage from the spider mites. We're just going to spray it up real nice. You want to make sure you get it from every angle too, because otherwise in that plant there's definitely a lot of little tiny crevices that your rubbing alcohol might not get to. And always be sure to spray it off with water about 5 minutes after you've sprayed it with the rubbing alcohol. We're not going to trim any of these up as they are all rather small yet, and I like the stacking crassula to get a little bit larger. But before we leave this one alone for the next 3 weeks, we're going to spin it around. So these plants will start growing back towards the other direction and straighten out a little bit. I tend to do that. I rotate them so we get some nice even growth in the plant so they're not just growing in one direction. Now this whole planter I think is 24 by 6, and this is going to take 4 cups of water in total. It seems like a lot, but because it's such a deep basin, a lot of that water stays at the bottom and is slowly soaked up over time up into the roots. With this soil mixture, I have 50% peat moss and 50% regular soil. So it really acts as a wick, slowly bringing up the water. As it dries up, it'll fill up and pull it to the root systems. And I've had great results with growing containers like this for succulents. This one right here is about the same setup. We have a couple different varieties in here, like these dolphin succulents and some sort of flapjack succulents. I don't know the exact variety here, but those are pretty neat. And then we've got some Pearly von Nurnberg, some Echeveria, and some Sedum bronze in here too. So we are going to give this the same amount of water. I already sprayed a little bit of rubbing alcohol on this one, and then some right here. There's just a couple of signs of mites, but again, I'd rather just nip it in the butt while I see it. Either you can spray it, or if they're in a location where you can just use your hand and kind of scrape them off there. They're really, really delicate, so you can easily kill them with your fingers as well. So with this one, we're going to do the same amount of water. The last 4 cups of water are going to be going into this container here. So that was nice and easy, not too much. Again, these are all real small, so nothing needed pruning at all. And they're looking quite well. They're looking good. Now on to our only plants that have supplemental lighting in here. These are Sempervivum. These are under a 600 watt LED fixture. Just plug that in to give you an idea of what it looks like. This a pretty pink hue, so I usually only run the grow light during the sunlight period of the day. In the winter, it goes maybe an hour after sunset. That way I can make sure that these are getting enough light where they're really going to grow faster than they would without any supplemental light, because I'm trying to get these to shoot off little chicks everywhere so we can then propagate them for the next growing season outside in the yard. This soil mixture is a little bit different. I have a video on how to do that. If you go on my channel and just search Sempervivum indoor planter, or just search that on YouTube, my channel will probably come up with this video. I've got rocks down underneath this, and then I also use some orchid growing mix and some peat moss as well. That way it's really well draining, and then this top layer here is raised off of the bottom of this, so any excess water can just sit down below here and then slowly wick up through the soil as well. These Sempervivum absolutely love this container that we grew them in. It's a first rough draft with growing them indoors here in this kind of a container, with the multi-layers and the rocks and everything. So we're going to perfect this over time, but so far they've been doing great. Even our gold nugget cultivar Sempervivum have been starting to change colors a little bit, so it shows that they really like this setup too. This container is also going to get 4 cups of water today. There really isn't any maintenance to be done on these, as they're not growing too tall to the point where I would cut them off and then replant them, and then there's also no chicks to divide, so all we have to do for this container is the watering. All right, those will be nice and happy for the next 3 to 4 weeks for sure. Sometimes I've found that these do just fine going a whole month without watering, being that they're Sempervivum. They're really... That's it for today's video. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching this entire watering and maintenance schedule video. I hope you liked seeing all of the plants that we've got growing in here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to click this box up here to move on to the next video. And as always, happy gardening.